Hey, how you doing? This is Adam Post, publisher of more than 1,000 comic books and marketing expert covering colleges panic as mega donors pull all their donations. Let's get into the story. Before we do, please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications. Give me a thumbs up. I really appreciate you guys. Coming from CNN Business, $500 million Harvard mega donor halts his donations, says elite schools produce whiny snowflakes. Coming from CNBC, Wall Street titans help to fuel Ivy League donor revolt. And coming from Fortune, Bill Ackman's battle with the Ivy League is about more than DEI. Gen Z are graduating without the right behavioral and emotional skills for the workplace. It's not just about the problems with anti-Semitism at these elite universities. It's not even just the problems with diversity, equity, and inclusion. The students who are graduating are incompetent. They're negligent. They haven't learned the proper skills. Of course, not all of them, but many of them. And these billionaire donors have finally started to figure out, if you guys don't push back on this, you're going to be at least partially responsible for absolutely destroying the country. And so they're pushing back. Hedge fund billionaire Ken Griffin, who has donated more than $500 million to Harvard University, has halted contributions to his alma mater and claimed elite schools produce whiny snowflakes. Griffin, one of the richest people in the world, joins a growing list of donors to Harvard, the University of Pennsylvania, Columbia, and other top schools who have decided to close their checkbooks. At a conference in Miami on Tuesday, Griffin expressed deep frustration with the state of American universities, including the disastrous testimony before Congress by the presidents of Harvard, MIT, and UPenn. Griffin, the founder of hedge fund Citadel, said he is no longer supporting Harvard financially, but would like that to change. Quote, until Harvard makes it very clear that they're going to resume their role as educators of young American men and women to be leaders, to be problem solvers, to take on difficult issues, I am not interested in supporting the institution, Griffin told CNBC's Leslie Picker during the MFA Network Miami conference. The donor backlash at Ivy League schools raises questions about the sway wealthy individuals hold over educational institutions. A lot of these institutions already have multi-billion-dollar endowments, money that they've raised. They don't really need these new donations, but they sure would love to have these donations. And they also don't need multi-billionaires out there saying, hey, these schools are terrible. It's not good for the schools. They need to figure out how they're going to fix this. Just last year, Griffin made a $300 million gift to Harvard's Faculty of Arts and Sciences. And at the time, the billionaire praised Harvard as a great institution and hailed FAS for being committed to advancing ideas that will shape humanity's future while providing important insight into our past. Across 4 decades, Griffin has donated more than $500 million. That includes a $150 million contribution to financial aid in 2014 that Harvard said holds the record for the largest single gift to undergraduate financial aid and to Harvard College. Griffin, who has built a fortune that Bloomberg estimates at $37 billion, is now expressing significant concern about the direction of elite schools and diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. Quote, will America's elite universities get back to the roots of educating American children, young adults, to be the future leaders of our country, or are they going to maintain being lost in the wilderness of microaggressions and a DEI agenda that has no real endgame, Griffin said. DEI policies have emerged as a flashpoint at universities and in the business world, with some arguing they've gone too far. Of course they've gone too far. Griffin suggested that students at elite schools are just caught up in the rhetoric of oppressor and oppressee and just like whiny snowflakes. The billionaire also reiterated that he won't hire students who signed an anti-Israel statement issued by Harvard organizations in October. However, Griffin said it's just wrong to lump all students who belong to groups that signed the statement together, saying don't paint them all with the same brush. A number of other major Harvard donors have halted their donations to the school, including former Victoria's Secret billionaire Leslie Wexner and billionaire Len Blavatnik, whose family foundation had donated at least $270 million to Harvard. Coming from Fortune, Bill Ackman's battle with the Ivy League is about more than DEI. Gen Z are graduating without the right behavioral and emotional skills for the workplace. In November last year, a flood of alumni donations came pouring into Harvard, Hardly an unusual event for a school that oversees a $50 billion endowment. But something stood out. Many of the donations amounted to exactly $1. The tiny contributions were a protest of a campus culture that, in the eyes of critics, had restricted political speech while giving free rein to anti-Semitism. The action had been inspired by Mark Rowan, CEO of private equity giant Apollo, who a month earlier had called on fellow alums of the University of Pennsylvania, where he has also been a prodigious donor, to join him in stiffing that school with the $1 donations. This Ivy League versus Wall Street battle erupted in the context of bitter division over the Israel-Hamas conflict and its tragic cost in thousands of lives. It has also provided fodder for a much wider attack on diversity, equity, and inclusion, but even in that context, the breadth of the dollar donation protest was striking, and so has been the continued dissatisfaction among alumni and donors. Ackman and his allies probably stand to the right of much of the business community on diversity issues, but his activism has struck a chord beyond culture warrior circles because it tapped into a wider discontent. American business elites are heavily invested in the country's top universities, as donors, as employers of their graduates, and as parents of students or potential students, and many are unsatisfied with their return on investment. Many fear that curriculums and campus life don't prepare graduates for the professional world, that the students' outcomes don't justify their soaring costs, and that the institution's leaders, most of them products of academia themselves, aren't equipped to address those problems. Philosophic differences between business and academic communities are hardly new, of course, and complaints about the behavior of young people these days go back to the time of Socrates. But the dysfunction around campus speech has brought new urgency to concerns shared by corporate leaders and current students alike, that universities aren't producing good citizens or good co-workers. For some activists, the answer is to make universities, well, more corporate. After the resignation of Harvard President Claudine Gay in January, Ackman posted a long essay on X comparing Harvard to a massive business that has long been mismanaged. Quote, universities should broaden their searches to include capable business people for the role of president, he said. Unsurprisingly, those who work at universities see this as an attack on academic freedom. At Penn, for example, more than 900 faculty members signed a letter opposing Rowan's campaign, decrying an attempted hostile takeover by external actors with no academic expertise. But as the levels of vitriol rose, it's worth asking, what, if anything, could academia learn from the business world about leadership and civil debate? And what would business gain if academia followed its lead? Statistics compiled by the Academic Council on Education show just how rare it is for business people to attain the top post at a university. In ACE's 2023 survey of higher education presidents, fewer than 20% reported a career background outside the academy, and only 4% identified their background as business executive. Kings of finance have seized on such statistics to criticize their university counterparts, but the prospect of running a school themselves would probably give the moguls pause. Think of a university as analogous to a sprawling corporation with tens of thousands of employees and divisions with specialties ranging from Shakespeare to particle physics to medical research. Then imagine having to run this corporation when many of your senior managers cannot be fired because of tenure. And while you're at it, you'll also be engaging in relentless fundraising, overseeing major construction projects, and maybe even presiding over a massive sports empire. In such a complex environment, a business person accustomed to wielding the buck stops here executive authority is likely to struggle. Quote, in higher ed, you have to build consensus to get anything done, says Bill Funk, a consultant whose firm, William Funk & Associates, has assisted in over 400 university president searches. Quote, you just can't dictate. It's misleading to imply, as some in the Wall Street camp do, that business voices are absent from that campus consensus building. Charlie Eaton, a sociology professor at UC Merced and the author of Bankers in the Ivory Tower, says that while former business leaders hold few presidencies, they nonetheless wield outsized influence reflected in the number of executives who sit on university boards and in the growing clout of the school's chief financial officers and chief investment officers. In promulgating the idea that universities are business ignorant, he says, quote, Bill Ackman's criticisms are all pretty silly and unserious. The problem with a consensus culture, though, is that it makes it easy to avoid difficult conversations and to stumble into groupthink and inertia. One of the few high-profile university presidents with a business background is Mitch Daniels, who retired at the end of 2022 after 9 years at the helm of Purdue, a public research university. A former governor of Indiana who also spent a decade as a senior executive at pharma giant Eli Lilly, Daniels won praise freezing tuition throughout his tenure during a period when the average college tuition in the U.S. rose 12% a year. Daniels tells Fortune that soaring costs have really begun to erode public confidence in the value of a college education. That inflation, he says, arises from a combination of colleges' pricing power and the need to satisfy all their internal constituents. College leaders' instinct is to figure out how much money it will take to keep the various factions happy, he says. Quote, and then turn around and decide what tuition do we charge to get that amount. Daniels says his approach at Purdue was to ask harder questions that were more bottom-line driven and strategic. Quote, what do we need to do to make ends meet and serve our top priorities? To solve that equation for zero, what do I need to do to avoid a tuition increase? Such a mindset comes naturally to a business person, but for now, Daniels' example is likely to remain an outlier. Funk, the search consultant, says that many schools have expressed a greater desire to hire leaders with non-academic backgrounds. But when push comes to shove, he says, they tend to stack search committees with academics who in turn favor hiring fellow academics. It may take a lot more pressure from business members on university boards and from school CFOs and CIOs to open up college leadership to a greater diversity of ideas. If business leaders are unlikely to change academia's managerial culture, they may be poised to find common ground with university leaders on the culture of campus discourse. Universities have for decades enjoyed a reputation as places of free and open debate. The academy also skews to the left, and in some cases, universities have used language such as trigger warnings in safe spaces and speech codes to guide discourse in and out of the classroom. Many of these concepts developed as defenses against hate speech, bias, and intimidation of minorities. But critics say they're increasingly undermining the exchange of ideas. Antagonists point to evidence including the shouting down of speakers who hold controversial views and the firing of faculty who teach material deemed to be offensive by a handful of students. Most seriously, amid the emotions laid bare by the Gaza conflict, some college campuses have devolved to the point where students who disagree cannot muster the civility to speak with one another. This is a problem for schools and for companies. In business environments, employees cannot choose who they interact with and must learn to work with people who may hold very different worldviews than their own. This has posed a challenge for managers seeking to integrate recent college graduates into their ranks. And the graduates themselves share the frustration. In a recent survey of 20-somethings by a consortium of nonprofits, including the American Association of Colleges and Universities, 39% said their colleges had not taught them emotional or behavioral skills that would help them transition into the workplace. In this fraught climate, some schools are taking cues from an elite university that isn't Penn or Harvard. In 2015, the University of Chicago adopted principles requiring the schools to, quote, promote a lively and fearless freedom of debate and deliberation, but also to protect that freedom when others attempt to restrict it. More than 100 universities have since adopted the Chicago Statement or a version of it. In 2023, 8 signed on, including Clemson, Virginia Tech, and the University of Michigan, did so in January. According to free expression advocacy group PEN America, there's been a flurry of fresh interest in recent months as college leaders look to make debate on their campuses more constructive and less toxic. Quote, lively and fearless freedom of debate, as it happens, is also something that business leaders want to cultivate. It's a cultural trait that's vital in an era of rapid technological advances in which companies feel increasing pressure to be nimble and adaptable. A freedom to disagree culture has been a hallmark of CEOs like the late Jack Welch of General Electric and Virgin Group's Richard Branson. More recently, it's gained traction in leadership circles through books like Radical Candor by executive coach and ex-Googler Kim Scott. As CEO advisor Timothy Clark wrote last year in Harvard Business Review, quote, when employees at every level speak up, they circulate local knowledge, expand the universe of useful ideas, and prevent collective tunnel vision. If the Chicago Statement principles catch on more widely on campuses, they could help students build skills in free and civil debate that could in turn become a bridge between their university tenures and their future careers. The statement could also serve as a reminder to business leaders about the value of free expression. The mega donors, the multi-billionaires, have started to realize they're going to get held responsible for these colleges if they keep funding these colleges. These are very sophisticated guys. They know what they're doing. They know what's been going on at these colleges. They only spoke up when they had to speak up because of the Israel-Hamas conflict. But now they are speaking up, and now they've realized colleges have a terrible reputation in this country, particularly the Ivy League colleges. They need to do something about the diversity, equity, and inclusion, and the terrible students with terrible attitudes they're pushing through their system. We'll continue to follow this and see what the updates are. In the meantime, let me know what you think of all this in the comments below. Always love to see your ideas. Please be sure you are subscribed to the channel. Click the bell for notifications, give me a thumbs up, and I'll see you again soon with another video. And if I don't see you, I will miss you.